What's going on, guys? Hey, we're back, baby. We got a brand new Cappy Army video, and of course, Cappy is bringing some information about conflicts that I didn't even know were going on. This says cartel war just exploded in Europe. And I want to tell you guys something interesting that I actually found out living here in Ukraine, working on the front line for a little while, being involved in different facets of Ukraine's defense. I actually about a year ago found out that, and I've shared this a little bit, but not in great detail. There's a lot of South American volunteers who come to fight for Ukraine. Some of them that I've met, fantastic soldiers, great fighters, and they're here to fight for freedom and help protect Ukraine. Shout out to Carlos. He's one of the best soldiers I've ever met in my life, and he's from Colombia. But there is a very large percentage of these South Americans, specifically Colombians. We're starting to see a lot more Brazilians that come for the financial aspects, basically straight up mercenary work, coming, getting hired by a foreign government to receive paychecks to fight their enemies. Okay, which hey, I did the same more or less. Well, I did do the same, but when we're talking about the U.S. dollar to the Ukrainian hryvnia, the UAH, right? That's their currency. I've spent a lot more money and a lot more of my time, resources, and money here in Ukraine than I did profiting. I mean, that's just a fact. And anybody from a Western country will agree with this. Please, in the comments, if you're here in Ukraine or you've been in Ukraine, you know that you end up draining your savings account, selling your stocks. And this is examples from my experience, to basically support yourself in Ukraine, get yourself the gear that's going to save your life in Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. So most Westerners come from to Ukraine for a different reason, not usually financial, right? Anyways, something that we've seen, and it's been widely talked about now in the media, is that cartels from South America, specifically Colombia, but some other countries as well, are sending some of their cartel members, their cartel soldiers, to Ukraine to get drone experience, to get combat experience, to get weapons experience in a modern peer-to-peer war. And then basically report back, bring that training back, bring that information back to their cartel leaders. That is a thing that's been happening for the last few years now. But what I recently learned about 8 months ago or so is that some of these cartel members that are coming over are actually also actively trying to set up their own cartel rings, drug rings, criminal networks in Ukraine. And Ukraine's SBU, their security services, are actively hunting them down. So I just thought that was really interesting because I have a feeling that, I mean, this is about cartels, so it's directly related, but pretty interesting stuff. Also, before we jump into it, we've got our t-shirt you guys have been seeming to love, man, which makes me so happy because I thought it was a really cool idea. The ORC SHASHLIK, the ORC barbecue t-shirt. I thought it was a good idea. You guys seem to like it in the comments, and then I made it and we put it up for sale and you guys are buying it, dude. That's such a cool feeling. So thank you for everybody who's got it. Please, please, if you're willing and able and comfortable, when you receive your merch, take a picture of it, of you wearing it, and put it in our Discord. I want to see it, man. And if you don't want your face in it or whatever, I don't care, but just or even direct message it to me. I don't care, but I want to see you guys wearing that merch. Link to that will be in the description. All right, guys. I yapped enough. 4 minutes in. Let's get after it. Cappy Army, check him out, baby. He is the GOAT. One of the godfathers of this content sphere, as I like to call it. Let's go.
Europe has been hit by a record wave of illicit substances. Authorities are now warning about narco states and drug factories operating on an industrial scale across the continent.
Now, Spanish police have made the largest ever maritime cocaine seizure from a container ship en route from Brazil.
A narco submarine, which had travelled several thousand kilometres across the Atlantic, with 9 tons of cocaine.
The war on drugs in the Americas is finally spilling over into Europe. People were shocked to see in 2025 when a Polish tactical team swooped in on Black Hawk helicopters and arrested Mexican cartel sicarios who had infiltrated into Poland and set up shop there.
Bro, Poland does not play about their borders, bro. Oh my God. Poland, I mean, we've seen so many stories about Poland just like openly being like, immigrants, don't come here. You're not welcome here. If you come here, we're going to get you. We're going to send you back. At least illegal immigrants. I don't really know their stance on legal immigration.
Are they doing that far away from home? The effects of the spreading drug networks have caused a surge in corruption, weapons trafficking, and organized crime, powerful enough now to begin to challenge state institutions in Europe, while creating opportunities for Russia to try to exploit the chaos. It was fast becoming a national security issue.
Levels of violence once associated with Mexico or Colombia are now spreading across the major port cities of the old continent.
Today, we're going to examine how Latin American cartels quickly built a foothold inside Europe when no one was looking, how authorities are joining forces to fight back, and why intelligence services and organized crime are now becoming increasingly intertwined. This is what authorities are now calling the Atlantic Cocaine Highway right here. It's a stretch of water between the Azores and Canary Islands. The cartel has turned this maritime...
Bro, I love this kind of content, man. Cappy makes the best
highway into a logistics network for transporting drugs. It's where European authorities just pulled off their biggest drug bust in history. For 2 weeks, military and police vessels prowled the high seas here, following intelligence that narco-traffickers were using more sophisticated at-sea transfers to smuggle cocaine across the Atlantic. Their intelligence proved to be correct. Authorities intercepted multiple smuggling vessels while they were trying to offload their product. Each was carrying enough narcotics to supply criminal markets across Europe for months. It should have been a major victory. Instead, it actually convinced many investigators in Europe of the exact opposite. Despite record seizures and large tactical raids, the cartels don't appear to be shrinking. They're expanding. The mission confirmed their worst fears, that Latin American drug cartels were
I want to see that.
adaptation control raids. The cartels don't appear to be shrinking.
Netherlands. Cocaine use in Europe. Oh, okay, that makes sense. In Netherlands, you got Amsterdam, dude. Amsterdam's like that's like nonstop Burning Man out there, like a Coachella festival. Spain, Ireland, Denmark, Norway, Croatia. Wow.
They're expanding. The mission confirmed their worst fears, that Latin American drug cartels were adapting their tactics faster than Europe could keep up with. The warning of this came from one of Belgium's most senior judges. For years, Belgium, Antwerp, had become one of the primary gateways for cocaine entering into Europe. Investigators uncovered corruption inside their ports and criminal networks with enough money to bribe and intimidate officials. Drug traffickers were no longer operating on the fringes of society here. They were beginning to influence the institutions that were meant to stop them. It was starting to look like the problems we have over here in America. That's what prompted the judge to take the unusual step of publishing an open letter to the public. He warned that Belgium was in real danger of resembling a narco state. He said, quote, "The amount of money that's involved to influence people, to corrupt people, and to bribe, it is so big that it is really a danger for the stability of our society. The mafia are becoming a parallel force that challenges not only the police, but the judiciary," end quote. But how was that possible? How does a continent conducting record drug busts simultaneously find itself facing record drug trafficking? For years, European authorities believed that they were just simply dealing with a drug smuggling problem, no big deal. They didn't know how bad it was about to get. Unlike the United States, Europe, they don't exactly have a DEA-style agency with its own tactical teams. Instead, Europol essentially acts as the brains of their operation. They fuse intelligence from dozens of countries before handing off targets to elite tactical units like Belgium's DSU, the Dutch DSI, and France's raid teams. It's fast becoming one of the Dutch DSI and France's...
Dude, how sick is that? Those all look wicked, man. DSU, DSI, and RAID. Dang, that's cool.
His raid teams. It's fast becoming one of the biggest areas of cooperation between American officials and European officials. The result is less like a single war on drugs and more like a coalition campaign. On land, another massive multinational operation recently confirmed our worst fears. Authorities launched the final phases of Operation Fabrica, a series of lightning-fast, simultaneous raids that had to be coordinated between Poland, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands on the same exact day and time. In one day, tactical teams descended on a network of dozens of industrial-scale drug labs and arrested multiple cartel suspects, including 2 very high-value targets. These helicopter fast infiltration assaults were becoming a common sight across Europe. The actual tactical raids resembled counterterrorism operations more than your traditional police work, and often it's former counter-terror teams in Europe who are assigned to these missions. Tactical units struck multiple locations simultaneously before suspects could try to destroy the evidence. This prevents them from being able to warn their accomplices or flee across any borders. What we're seeing is these helicopters, these armored vehicles, breaching teams, and heavily armed officers descending on targets across multiple countries within just a span of a few hours. This coordination is insane. Their goal was to overwhelm the network before it realized it had already been compromised. There are typical drug busts, and then there's the scale of what we're seeing here. We're talking about enormous factories that are pumping out drugs and precursor chemicals every day. Counter-terror police were uncovering a massive operation that was difficult really to comprehend. What investigators found shocked even veteran narcotics officers. These were industrial-scale factories capable of producing enormous quantities of drugs. Inside, they discovered thousands of kilograms of finished narcotics, mountains of precursor chemicals, and enough toxic waste to fill entire tanker trucks. This was generating these cartels billions of dollars in profits for these criminal networks that were running them. This was the moment when investigators realized that something had fundamentally changed in Europe. European criminals were turning the continent from being an importer of drugs to becoming a manufacturer of them. Soon, it wouldn't matter if the drugs were coming from the Middle East or the Americas, they would be coming from within. European authorities and customs agencies have started hitting back by deploying AI-assisted cartel screening systems. They're expanding container inspection, so they're conducting integrity checks on dock workers who have become some of the prime targets for cartel bribery attempts. So entire law enforcement task force were created for the sole purpose of hunting down corruption inside Europe's ports. For investigators, every compromised crane operator or shipping clerk represented a potential breach in the continent's defenses. Operation Fabrica was the largest synthetic drug bust in European history, but a dark truth cut through that sense of accomplishment. The investigation proved that Europe's criminal black market was transforming from this drug importer to this drug producer. But how? The Latin American drug cartels have been slowly gaining a foothold in Europe for decades, but the EU and its member states have taken criticism for being sluggish in their response. On his way out of his term as director of the EU Drug Agency, Alexis Gustel wrote that Europe was too focused on counterterrorism and domestic problems regarding the drug cartels as more of an American issue. He said, quote, "Criminal groups have globalized their activities and now operate simultaneously in their regions of origin, across EU member states and in drug-producing countries. The surge in cocaine has intensified competition, bringing with it a rise in market-related violence and an escalation in criminal capabilities. Major investigations in recent years have revealed unprecedented levels of coordination between groups operating across continents. Young people are being recruited via social media and transported across borders to commit violent acts." It sounds a lot like how you never heard about terrorism before 2001. These organized groups are becoming stronger and more powerful. The Latin American cartels originally used simple yet effective smuggling techniques in major European ports like Antwerp, Rotterdam, and Valencia. They bribe port officials to look the other way, allowing containers full of narcotics to slip into these high-traffic facilities and then quickly disperse into the criminal underground for distribution throughout the whole continent. The concern,
I always think like, taking the moral. I like to consider myself as one that takes the moral high ground in most situations, right? And I always wonder, like, man, how can somebody just be okay with taking money and letting these boats go through? Like they know what's on that's bad, even though if they know it's not drugs, they know what's on it's bad if they're getting bribed, right? But if somebody walked up to you and was like, "Here's 50 grand, let us, look the other way," what are you doing?
was becoming obvious. The drugs, they're bad, yes, but a bigger strategic level problem was brewing. What was all this drug money going to do to European institutions? Cartels developed smuggling routes through Africa that exploited security gaps in Mediterranean ports. The Sinaloa cartel in Mexico became particularly adept at these techniques, and the issue got so bad that the Times newspaper called France the quote-unquote New Mexico in 2024. Then something unexpected happened.
I heard France was the new Africa. Now they're the new Mexico?
Drug seizures at some of Europe's largest ports actually started falling. In Antwerp, authorities seized only 44 tons of cocaine in 2024, which is still a heck of a lot, but it's less than the 121 tons that were intercepted the year before. Rotterdam also saw a similar decline. So that's good news, right? At first glance, the story sounds like a success.
Well, they're missing
European
it.
authorities had spent years hardening their ports, installing new security systems. They were cracking down on corruption. It looked like the strategy was finally working. Unfortunately, the drug cartels and the European criminal underworld were prepared for this. When major port cities in Europe finally started increasing security measures in 2020, the smugglers adapted in several ways that actually increased the overflow of narcotics into European cities. Every victory Europe scored seemed to create a new challenge. According to a report from the EU Drug Agency, the amount of cocaine seized by authorities rose by over 100 tons in just 2 years after the port crackdowns went into effect. And the trend sees no sign of slowing down. Meth, ecstasy, cannabis, and virtually every other drug are also on the rise. Instead of going through the big ports, the smugglers shifted to alternative, mid-sized cities where there's less scrutiny. And instead of mixing huge containers full of drugs in with these cargo ship traffics, cartel smugglers teamed up with European mafias and criminal gangs to transfer the illicit cargo at sea. As the cartel's focus has shifted offshore, European authorities responded in kind. Maritime patrol aircraft, Coast Guard vessels, and even military assets were increasingly used and tasked with tracking suspicious vessel movement across the Atlantic. Intelligence analysts built detailed patterns of life around fishing boats that were suspected of participating in mid-ocean transfers. Instead of looking for a single shipment, authorities were attempting to map entire trafficking networks. These mothership to small boat transfers are what the maritime operations this April intercepted near the Azores. Once the drugs are distributed into smaller civilian vessels, it's much harder for the authorities to properly screen all of that civilian small boat traffic going into various waterways across the continent. Cartels are also exporting some of their most sophisticated...
Dude, look at that janky ass thing, bro. God, it looks like a dumpster.
Technologies with the European criminal underground networks, including narco subs, encrypted radios, and both aerial and seaborne drones. Besides finding new ways to circumvent inspectors at sea, narco traffickers are exploiting a unique European dynamic to manufacture drugs in-house. Europe has a huge pharmaceuticals industry that rakes in about 440 billion euros per year, accounting for 22% of the global market share. There are giants out there like AstraZeneca and Novartis, but also countless smaller subcontractors, and you got your generic manufacturers that supply pharmacies on a global scale. That means there's a tremendous demand for biologically active compounds across Europe to make all these medicines. But I bet you can already see where this is going. Many of these perfectly legal, perfectly legitimate ingredients for life-saving medicines also happen to be precursor chemicals for illegal narcotics. It was a suspicious quantity of precursor chemicals flowing into small pharmaceutical supply companies that first clued investigators in on the 24 drug lab raided by Operation Fabrica this year. While detectives were following the trail of these legal chemicals, they discovered some of the workers, the plant staff, were on the take. They were repackaging them with false labels and then diverting them to the illegal side of the operation. The operation shed more light on how Latin American cartels are putting the quote-unquote partnership model into practice in Europe. This is where I think the story gets much bigger than the cartels themselves. Under the partnership model, the various cartels basically subcontract existing mafias and criminal groups and...
Dude, look at this. It's crazy to me thinking about modern day mafias for some reason. When I was growing up, man, people like idolized the mafia, especially in Las Vegas, man. Vegas was built up from the mob, right? But seeing movies like The Godfather and Scarface and I don't know, it always kind of portrayed this cool aspect of the mafia. So thinking about them still being a thing is, I don't know, it's strange to me. Is it cool? Is it bad?
Gangs in Europe, rather than investing their own
bad.
personnel and resources into a completely foreign environment. The cartels make use of the underground infrastructure that already exists, that local elements that have spent generations being built. That includes everything from front companies and pharmaceutical labs to hired muscle and gun-running networks. Investigators often spend months tracking encrypted communications. They have to monitor financial transactions. It requires coordination across different countries because Europe is made up of so many different nations, which makes investigations more difficult. For someone like my American brain to comprehend, you got to coordinate between all of these different...
Damn!
small nations, poring over and analyzing all this different shipping data together. Then, once they get confirmation, they can send in a tactical team that is then sent to be unleashed on these organizations. By the time officers boarded the vessels near the Azores, the suspects had already been under surveillance for months. The arrangement between the cartels and the European gangs has led to an explosion of violence. Black market arms dealers in the Balkans have arguably benefited the most from the surge in drug profits. Not only is there more demand than ever before for surplus weapons from the former Yugoslavian states, but even small-time gangs across Europe are now flush with cash from drug sales to pay for them. To counter these networks, European agencies increasingly relied on multinational task force, so intelligence that's gathered in Spain might generate arrests in Belgium. Evidence collected in Germany could trigger raids in Croatia. Criminal organizations are becoming more international, which has forced law enforcement to do the same thing in reaction. During a 2020 multinational raid in the Balkans, authorities dismantled a sprawling criminal network involved in drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking. Hundreds of suspects were arrested, and investigators seized narcotics, firearms, and other contraband. The operation highlighted a growing reality. Europe's drug trade was doing more than importing cocaine. It was funding entire criminal enterprises. Authorities arrested nearly 400 suspects and seized over 100 firearms, along with large quantities of narcotics. The guns were both protection for the traffickers and smuggling product in themselves. The increasing sophistication that the cartels have brought to their smuggling routes applies to black market guns as well. Despite some of the most infamously strict gun laws in the world, UK police are now seizing a gun each day on the streets of London. And just this past March, coordinated police raids in Greece, Bulgaria, and Spain arrested suspects accused of running a firearms for cannabis operation that had flooded Western Europe with guns from Turkey and the Balkans. Quoting from former EU Drug Agency Director Goose Steele again, a defining trend has been the emergence of crime as a service, with specialized networks providing everything from industrial-scale laboratory construction to chemical procurement, logistics, and violence on demand. But what began as a narcotics problem is increasingly being viewed as a national security problem. Investigators noticed another group that was benefiting from all this instability. Besides the gangs and cartels, there's another party that stands to profit from all this chaos. A European Council on Foreign Relations report identified how Russia has spent the last 20 years developing organized crime networks to destabilize adversaries and undermine them from within. Quote, today, Russian-based organized crime is responsible for around 1/3 of the heroin on Europe's streets and significant amount of non-European people trafficking as well.
Hold on. You're telling me Russia is a bad actor? What the?
Well as most illegal weapons imports, end quote. The report joins a mountain of evidence that Russia is accelerating its hybrid war strategy against Europe through both state-sanctioned and unofficial support for criminal elements. The escalating drug war in Europe is the perfect cover for black cash, as it's called, from Russia to provide resources to their own network of organized crime proxies all over the continent. The director for policy and programming at GlobeSec describes the crucial link between Russian intelligence and organized crime, saying, quote, in the early 2000s, representatives of the security services, including former officers of the KGB intelligence, consolidated their control over the Russian state, and their connections to the criminal underworld became part of the state system, end quote. The consequences were now extending far beyond just drugs. The record influx of drugs into Europe has a direct destabilizing effect. The EU Drug Agency estimates that there were over 7,500 drug-induced deaths in 2023, mostly men in their 30s and 40s. Besides deaths and the less tangible but equally devastating effects of addiction, the cartel presence in Europe also fuels entire criminal enterprises that Russia's proxies benefit from. Corruption, money laundering, racketeering, and the old gangster favorites eroding the public confidence in the European Union to keep the peace. Keeping the EU and the majority of NATO member states fragmented is a major strategic goal of Russia. And as the criminal networks and infrastructure develop around the drug trade, Russia's own proxies have an easier time infiltrating and sabotaging military-industrial targets. A GlobeSec study found that 131 individuals recruited by Russia since 2022 to conduct kinetic sabotage attacks in Europe, 35 were criminals who were linked to the Kremlin's proxy network. In a United 24 interview, Dominka Hedju stressed why Europe is so uniquely vulnerable to this dimension of Russia's hybrid war strategy. Quote, EU countries remain too slow, reactive, and cautious in responding to hybrid warfare, even as Russia grows more aggressive. If this does not change, we will lose, end quote. This isn't to say that the only reason the cartels are expanding in Europe so aggressively is because of Putin's urging. It's more of a case of converging goals than a grand conspiracy, I think. Both sides are pursuing their own goals in Europe, and just because those goals align for now doesn't mean that they're close allies necessarily.
I love how they just there's no beating around the bush. They're not saying like Russia is doing this. They just have a photo of Vladimir Putin. They're like, let's not play games. We know who this is.
While Russia's FSB and other intelligence services have the dissolution of NATO and the EU in mind, the cartels are a business, a ruthless, bloody, and deeply immoral business that profits off ruining people's lives, but a business nonetheless. They aren't trying to win a war or establish geopolitical spheres of influence. They're trying to make money. That means there is a limit to how much either side trusts the other or how much they're really willing to cooperate. But as long as it lasts, this shadow alliance isn't to be underestimated, I think. At the end of May, the European Parliament drafted a new strategy document that aims to counter the growing threat of drug trafficking. The briefing indexed the increasingly complex transnational nature of the drug trade that makes closer cooperation between law enforcement and national
Cannabis resin, so that's like wax, right? Like dabs, herbal cannabis, coke, meth, heroin, amphetamine, and then methamphetamine. Interesting.
nature of the drug trade that makes closer cooperation between law enforcement entities of the EU and the United States more essential than ever before. In April 2026, the EU enacted a new anti-corruption measure that takes aim at the money laundering practices that enable drug and arms traffickers to keep their finances out of law enforcement's reach. The EU also advanced new regulations that govern how precursor chemicals are categorized and tracked on 420 out of sheer coincidence, I think. New legislation with actual teeth is an essential component of Europe's counter-drug response. But the biggest sign yet that Europe is taking the threat seriously are the ambitious enforcement actions that we're seeing in 2026. The two record-setting drug busts that I mentioned at the start of the video are only the beginning of a more aggressive stance that's yielding some tangible results. On April 5th, Europol and police in Montenegro arrested 12 leading members of the Balkan cartel.
Dang.
This shift explains why so many of Europe's elite tactical units are now involved in anti-cartel operations. Organizations that were originally built to stop terrorism are increasingly being deployed against organized crime groups that are capable of generating billions of dollars in revenue and in some ways may be more of a threat than terrorism. These groups are attempting to corrupt public institutions, and what makes them so dangerous is that they operate across dozens of countries simultaneously. The line between counterterrorism and counter-organized crime is becoming harder to distinguish. This is a new emerging problem. At first came the smugglers, then came the factories, then came the corruption networks, then came the weapons traffickers, then came the intelligence services corruption. In March, a massive joint operation between European and Ecuadorian authorities dismantled a huge part of the Los Lobos cartel drug and money laundering operations, seizing nearly 7 tons of cocaine across 3 countries. Europol's expanded mandate, thanks to the legislative action from Parliament, means that they now have better capabilities than ever before to centralize and coordinate intelligence gathered from each of these raids, directing law enforcement resources more quickly and effectively. Despite these early successes in 2026, Europol and the various police agencies across Europe are up against a deadly and sophisticated foe. The cartels adapt rapidly, and the organized crime networks of Europe are now supercharged with narco funds and black market weapons. One way or another, 2026 is a crucial year for Europe's own war on drugs. If you found this video interesting, check out this one on how the CIA...
Check out Cappy, guys. Absolutely. Dude, what a cool what a cool video, man. I love that. Am I crazy, or does it seem like we are living in an insane world these days? You know, I can't tell if it's just because media and being able to get information out so much faster is what's making it seem like the world's crazier these days, or if the world's just genuinely getting crazier. We have this viewer, and he's 75, I believe, and he'll pop in the comments every once in a while. And I made this comment a while back about just the wars that are happening in the world, and he said no, things are definitely getting crazier. So I wonder if this is the same, if he has the same stance on just like in general with crime and war and everything, or if he was just referring to war. But this is cool, dude. I mean, obviously it's a major problem, but I love learning about this stuff. Anyways, please like, share, subscribe, you guys. Let's hit 50,000 subs, huh? Let's get there. Also, check out the t-shirt if you want. Love you guys. Peace.